welcome back to my channel. This video is all about Angular getting started. This is part 1 and an introduction to this course. In this course I'll be covering the softwares that are required for the development, how to install and what are the required softwares that you really needed for the Angular development, and then we will talk about Angular and then TypeScript language that we will use throughout this course, followed by we will cover what are components, what are the usage of the components, the nested components, and how to create components using the CLI as well as manually, okay, which makes our life easy when we use the CLI. And then we also cover what are one-way binding, two-way bindings, interpolations, ngModel, and so on. There's so many pipes, inbuilt pipes that we will cover, and we will also cover how to interact with the user actions. Followed by we will cover some inbuilt directives, examples of the attribute directives, structural directives, and then we will also cover the input and output feature of this Angular, where you can supply a component with the data and then you can also get notified by the child component to your parent component. Followed by we will use the HTTP service implementation to call the external APIs, which will populate the data and show in your application. And then we will also implement a routing mechanism, and we will see how to navigate between different routes within the application. And at last, we will also explain you what are the common errors that you might face in an application development, and we will resolve it throughout the course. You might see some errors coming up when I develop, and mostly those are the things that you will also end up getting it. So you know how did I resolve it, and you know how to resolve it by saying that. I hope you will enjoy this journey and you will achieve in learning something. Upon completion of this course, you will mostly be able to develop a single application using Angular, and you can even crack an interview. Now this is a beginner course. In the next intermediate course, where I will cover the code operation that you can do using Angular, using a reactive forms. I will cover more things on the reactive forms in the next clip or in a separate video. So come, let's get started and continue to watch the next clip for your continuity. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Angular getting started, part 2. Here we're going to talk about how to set up the local environment by installing the required softwares, and then create a new project and we'll start from the scratch. I will also provide you the GitHub URL where you can download the initial project and you can start from there as well. Without delay, come let's get started. These are the softwares that you need. Visual Studio IDE is the one that I'm using for the whole course to demonstrate this. So I need Visual Studio Code, and then we need to install the Angular globally. I'll give you the command, and then we have to install the Node.js. Because this Angular is fully based out of the TypeScript, Visual Studio has inbuilt TypeScript supports, and so we will use the TypeScript from there. So open up the command prompt and type node -- version. This will tell you what node version you have. If you don't have, don't worry, I'll tell you where to download. Next you type ng -- version. This will give you entire versions of Node, npm and Angular. Let's wait for it. It's reading. And yes, these are the versions, all good. So if you don't have any of these things, next you need to do is visit this website, which I'm going to show you right away. Go to nodejs.org and download the recommended version. As of this recording, 16.13 is the long-term support version. So I downloaded that and installed. Go to code.visualstudio.com and download the software for your Windows or Mac. You can click on that button and then select whichever version you have based out of your OS. Now what we are going to do is we're going to install the Angular CLI. So npm install -g stands for global, and you say Angular/CLI. So this will install the latest CLI version of Angular, and then that will be ready for us to go. Alright, so I have installed it already, so I didn't do it. So you use that command to install from your machine. This is the GitHub URL where my initial project has been placed. So you can go here, which is github.com, and I'll give you the link. And you can go and click on the code. Either you download the entire zip, that will give you the whole file, or you can click on this and clone that in your local. Open your Visual Studio Code, click on clone repository and type the URL that you copied from the GitHub. So if you copy this and then place enter, it will ask you to clone it in your local. You can do that and run the application. That's one way, but let's do this from scratch. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my location where I'm going to create my project. So I created a cmd command from there. So it opened up this directory, and from here what you need to do is you just need to type this command ng new and then followed by the project name. So this is Angular getting started, so my project name is Angular getting started. Once you enter this, it is going to ask you a couple of questions. First one is it's going to ask you about the css that you wanted to use. You can use the regular css, scss, all those things. So this is routing thing. For routing we will say no, followed by the css. We will select the css whichever you want. I'm selecting css, and then once you enter that, it is going to install the npm packages. So once this is getting installed, I'll explain you in the next clip about the default project that was created and each one of the file. Okay, so let's wait for a moment while it is getting installed. Okay, after a couple of minutes, the entire package has been installed, and now what we are going to do is we are going to navigate back to the directory that was created, which is Angular getting started. So I change cd and then followed by the project name. I'm inside this. Now what you can do is you can use this command code space dot. This will open up your project in Visual Studio Code. Now we have opened the project in Visual Studio Code. Now what you need to do is you can go to the terminal and create a new terminal. Now the terminal is opened and there is only one command now for you to run the application. It is ngserve. Once you put ngserve, it will default open in the port 4200. ngserve will going to build the application and run the application in a default port. The default port is 4200, 4200. So it's building the application. It's generating all the files that is required for the default template. All right, the application is built. Now you can open up that port, which is localhost/4200. So if I open up that in a browser, what you will see is a predefined template done by the Angular team. So this is what you will get. If you see the screen, good, you succeeded in opening a sample application. Now the next video will demonstrate what are the files they are present in this project, and we'll go one by one and then we'll start our coding. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Learn Smart Coding. In this video I'm going to cover introduction to Angular and other languages like TypeScript that we use for the Angular. We also see why we chose Angular. So Angular is a framework for building both small and large web applications. With Angular you can build a simple small website in a few hours or build rich, full-featured enterprise-level product management and inventory applications. Angular is a JavaScript framework for building client-side applications. These are the applications that run entirely in the user's browser. We use techniques we already know, including HTML and CSS, to build the user interface. And we write our code in TypeScript, which is an enhanced version of a JavaScript. So why Angular? Why not some other JavaScript framework? Well, there are a lot of other JavaScript frameworks out there. However, Angular makes our HTML more expressive. We can embed features such as if conditions, for loops, and local variables directly into our HTML. Angular has powerful data binding and lets us connect data directly to our UI. Angular promotes modularity. We build our application as a set of building blocks, making it easier to create and reuse content. And Angular has inbuilt support for communication with the backend server. This makes it easy for our web application to get and post data or execute server-side business logic. This is a beginner level course or a tutorial, I would say. However, this course assumes you have some basic knowledge of JavaScript for code, HTML for building a user interface, and cascading style set, or it is also called as CSS for styling. You do not need to have any prior knowledge of Angular or TypeScript. I will cover what you need in this course. If you have a working knowledge of each of these, that will help you learn this course faster. So what's next? Let's learn about TypeScript. Let's look at what is TypeScript. So TypeScript is a programming language that I will be using it for the Angular. In other words, TypeScript is the official programming language for Angular. So what is TypeScript? TypeScript is JavaScript with syntax of types. TypeScript is a strongly typed programming language that builds on JavaScript, giving you a better tooling at any scale. So there are official documentation of TypeScript, so I'm going to read about that. TypeScript adds additional syntax to JavaScript to support a tighter integration with your editor. It will catch errors earlier in your editor itself. TypeScript code converts to JavaScript, which runs anywhere on the browser. TypeScript understands JavaScript and uses type inference to give you great tooling without additional code. I'll give you all those in the description. So what is JavaScript? JavaScript is a language of the web. JavaScript is the language for the web and is executed by all browsers. The JavaScript language specification standard is officially called ECMAScript or ES. Most modern browsers supports ES5, which is ES 2015, which is the renamed of ES6 specification. It introduced many new features such as classes, arrow functions, and etc. So this is our sample application that we created in the previous demo. So if you see, these are the files by default created using the default template by the Angular. So if you go through all these things, there are important files that you should need to know before we get started. The first one is the packages. The package.json is the file which will contain all the packages that are required for us to execute, or I would say to run this application. If you look at this dependency section, these are the Angular packages that is used, and if you see this rxjx is the other packages that is used. So these are the default packages that we use for this application. Dev dependency sections are nothing but the packages that is required for our dev environment to work. This is only for our dev environment. That's why it's dev dependency. And in this, if you see, it is all specified with the Angular CLI, which CLI version we are using, what node type we are using, and then what testing we are using. Now the next one is the angular.json file. So this is the file where each section defines how our application has to be built, how our Angular compiler will use these information and build our application. For now, you don't need to know each section, but just for understanding, you should know what is this angular.json. Okay, and one more thing in angular.json that you should know is, if you look at the architect section where you have styles and scripts, if you specify any styles and scripts here, they will be used in the build process and they will be rendered in the build application. Okay, so anything that is global that we can specify here, which you will see in the demo. Now coming back to the next file, is the important file is the HTML index.html. So this is the index.html is the page that loads when we start the application. And if you see, this is one of the root component. We'll talk about the component in the next clip, but this is the root component, and this translates into the component that will be rendered here. Now the next important thing that we should know is the app.module. Module is nothing but, so each and every single Angular application will by default have at least one ngModule. So ngModule in Angular, these ngModules are called nothing but the Angular modules. So they are a little different because you import them from Angular and then you use them as a decorator on a class. We define a class called app module, and then we use the decorator to tell this module where it is going to get its import from. Because eventually we are going to run this on the browser, we will import a browser module. That is what you're seeing in the top, which Angular provides to us. We will learn more about these modules in the upcoming demos, but for now you can see a couple of things where we specify where to pull the information. So the declaration section is the one which will hold all the component information. Imports are the other modules where we will specify here, for example browser module. And then we will talk about providers and in a later section. and Bootstrap. And if you see the Bootstrap section, there is a default component created called app component. So app component is the one that will get bootstrapped here. So don't worry about the components, we'll talk in the next clip. And app component is here. We will have a component, we will have an HTML and CSS file here, and whatever you specify in this file is what is rendered in the application. In the next clip, we will see how to create the component and how to change the styles of a default template. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Learn Smart Coding. In the previous clip, we saw how to create a sample application using the ng command. Now in this video, what I'm going to show you is we are going to remove the default template and use the Bootstrap to design our own template. I'll be using bare minimum CSS to have a decent look and feel. So come, let's get started. So I have opened my application and the output side by side, so you can see the live changes as we copy paste some code and then it builds and runs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the getbootstrap.com, it's the official website for the Bootstrap. You can choose any version. I have choose 4. So if you go to the get started, there is something called CSS. This is the CDN URL, the content delivery network. So you copy the CSS and come to the html.index.html and paste it under the header section, the head section. If you paste this under the head section, it will be loaded whenever the application is loaded. So once we have this CSS in place, what we are going to do is we are going to remove the default template given by the Angular, and then we are going to place some navigation bar from our side. Okay, so all what we need to do is we need to go to the app.component.html and remove every. So here we are in the app component.html. I'm going to select every single code and delete everything. So this will wipe off the code, and then I'm going to paste a navigation text. You can see the navigation started appearing here. The restaurant is the name that I've given. Now I will also paste a piece of code which is the footer section. Here is the footer section code. I copied and pasted it, and now this is a bare minimum HTML. Alright, so we got a footer, we got a header. Now what we are going to do is we are going to create a component manually, and then we'll place this footer. So I will right click on the app folder and create a folder called core. So under the core folder, I'm planning to create 2 components, header and the footer. First, we will create a component called footer. So I'm going to create this folder manually and name it as footer. And there are 4 files which is required for a component, an HTML and a CSS and a .ts file. So when you create a component, there is a naming convention. Always you go with the feature .component.ts. TS stands for the TypeScript file. So here what we are going to do is we are going to create a file called footer.component.ts, and then we will also create a file called footer.component.html where all the HTML related code will come for this component. We'll talk more about it in a bit. Next is another file called footer.component.css. You can use other files based on which CSS that you wanted to use. It could be a SCSS or a CSS file. Now here what we are going to do is inside the component, I will create a component with a class called footer. So we will use the decorator called component above the class that you just created. So at the rate component, and if you open it, there are a couple of things that we need to say. The first thing that I will use is the selector. Selector is the one that you will use to specify the component in the HTML. We will look at that, how to use that. So for selector, you have to name it with appended with the app dash followed by the component name, and this app is configurable. You can configure this to a different name based out of your project. So now we'll go with app. The second one is the template. So there's something called template and template URL. Template is something, if the HTML code is very small, you can put the HTML directly into this template. So here I have put an hashtag with just some words in that. So we don't need to have a separate HTML file in this case. The next one is the styles URL. This is an array of string which will specify different CSS that is within your component. In our case, it's only one. So I've specified that CSS file here. And these three are the major thing that you need to use. There are other things called providers, which we will take a look at in the later session. So now we have these things. So as I said, we will implement the default ng on in it, and I'll explain you what is that. And there will also be a default constructor, so we will place that code also. Okay, now I formatted the code. So now what we are going to do is, after you create a component, this component needs to be declared in the ngModel section where the declaration goes, so that the Angular will know this component exists in the project and it has to be given to the caller whenever it is applicable. So what we will do is go to the ngModel, the app module, and then specify this footer component under the declaration section. So in order to use this template, we will use app-component like this, and then put this one here. That's it. Now see, hello footer is showing up. Now we don't need the footer section, so we remove this single thing. So we saw how to put HTML code directly under the template selector, and that's what the hello footer came. What we are going to do now is, we're going to copy the actual footer content, this content, and then put it into the footer.component.html. So once I put this code into this file, the footer.component.html, we need to have the same look and feel, right? So what we can do is, instead of template, we can say template URL. So template URL is the one of the metadata that you can specify which HTML to refer for this component. So in our case, whatever we had this in the footer, now it started coming up, right? So it's a clean code. You have separated a piece of code into a separate component, right? So now what we're going to do is, we're going to create a component using the Angular CLI, and you will see how easy it is to create that. So open up your terminal and type ng space g for generate, space c for component, and followed by another space. Provide the component name. In my case, I'm going to create a header component under the core folder. So I navigated to the core folder and I've typed this ng space g space c space the component name, which is header. So this will create a component and it will be registered automatically under the ngModel. If you remember, the footer component was registered in the ngModel, right? Similarly, the header component will also be registered under the declaration under the same ngModel automatically. So you don't need to create anything manually. Just by using this command, you have created the 4 files under the header folder, and then they have also been registered. It's that. Now what we will do, we will copy the header content from that app component HTML, like how we did for the footer. We will cut that content and put it into the header component.html file. Looks, there's an error. That's because we have not copied the content properly. I'm going to cut the remaining content and paste it properly. As soon as I paste it properly, it's going to build and it's going to reload the page, and we got what we had earlier. However, this is very separate, right? We have 2 separate components created, and then we have a piece of code in 2 different components. And if you can copy paste this component several times, the same content is going to be rendered how many times you're placing it. So that is very easy to use. You don't need to repeat the same set of code again and again. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to add a small logo to the header section next to the restaurant, and then we will stop there. Easy it is. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Learn Smart Coding. In this video clip, I'm going to cover the inbuilt directives and the data bindings, one-way data binding, two-way data binding, interpolations, and what are the other easy things that you can do with Angular. And these are the building blocks for you to get started with your development. So come, without delay, let's get started. So I've opened up my Visual Studio Code, the same project, and also the output to my right side, so you can see the live changes happening. What I've done is, I've created a component called binding examples. This component will just show you different examples of all those bindings, directives, and all those things that you can use it in the project. Alright, so I've just created using the ng command, and that is the one that is loaded onto the right side, right? So let's start. Inside the component, if you come, you can type here the properties. So if I say title, this is a public property, and if I say equal to, and within the quotes, if I give some text, like for example, so I've named as structural directives. So this is a string pointing to a property called title, and this, if you hover on it, it will clearly tell you the title property is of type string. So this is called TypeScript inference. It is inferring based on the right side, whatever we have typed, right? Now, for a better way, what we can type always is, we can say the title is of type string, and then we can say equal to, and then followed by the data. Now, let's say if you're not giving this, then you will simply say title of type string, and this is going to show you some error, and that's okay. It's basically saying we have not initialized this property. So in this case, what you can do, you can put a question mark, the exclamation mark, sorry, and this will tell Angular that this title property will be somehow given with the value after it is loaded, and that's why it is not showing you error. So what you can do is, there are two ways, right? One is either you give it here directly. So for now we will give it here directly. So we will say string, and then we'll say structural directives, and then we'll put a semicolon. We end this. Alright, now let's see how interpolation works, and after a couple of different demos, I'll show you what are the different ways you can initialize these properties. Going back to the HTML, what I wanted to do was, I wanted to create a div, and let's say container, and inside the container, what I wanted to do was an h1, I wanted to say structural directives example. Okay, once I do this, you can see to the right side, structural directive examples has been loaded here. Now if you have noticed, we have a title property which already tells us a structural directive. So how one-way interpolation works is, we remove this, we start with the double parenthesis, and then inside that, if you type in the property name, which is title in case, it's going to read this title, spelling mistake, title, T-I-T-L-E, I corrected it. Once you put this, the Angular will evaluate the property, and then it will put that text in this place. So that's why we already got structural directive examples. So in this case, you can clearly see there's a one-way interpolation happening, which is title, property, and then along with that, example is just a text added next to it. So this is how the Angular will inject or replace the data here. So we saw how one-way interpolation works. So the property in the component can be used with this brace, double brace, and inside that, if you put the property, it is going to evaluate and put that content into this place, right? So that's why we got structural directive examples. Great. All right, now let's see something else, a different way, right? So what I wanted to do was, I wanted to populate a couple of fruits names, right? Let's see how directives works now. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to say div, let's put in quickly. So I wanted to say an h tag saying fruits, and then come back to the component quickly. So I wanted to initialize fruits property, which is of public property. This is of type, right, string array, and that's it. Here again, undefined property, right? As soon as you remove this, it's going to show you an error which says it's not initialized, it's not under anything. You can initialize here by saying array, then this will go away. In our case, we are not going to do that. What we are going to do is, we will leave this. Now there is an easy way of identifying few things, right? If you come here, you wanted to know what the property values are. What you do is, you can say this property name here, and then followed by a pipe symbol and then JSON. So this way it will evaluate and tell you what it is here. Okay, right now there is nothing to show, so it's not coming. So let's leave this here for now and we'll come back here. So now there are a couple of structural directives. The moment you see a star in front of a letter, that's called structural directives. That's because it is going to change the structure of the DOM. That's why they are called structural directives. Now what are the structural directives that we have? So we have ngIf and we have star ngFor. If you notice this, ng is small case and I starts with the capital letter, right? So this is important. This is all inbuilt. We also have ng switch. So now let's focus on most commonly used inbuilt directives called ngIf and ngFor. As the name suggests, ngIf is nothing but it is going to evaluate some condition, and if the condition is true, it will display the content. If not, it will not display the content. And ngFor is kind of ngRepeat. ngRepeat in AngularJS, they are repeated content. Okay, so let's go through one by one. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a hashtag. This is an order list. So here what we will do is we will say some fruit name. Let's say ORANG orange, and then what else? We can say banana, and we can keep saying this. You can see this content coming to the right side. So what we are going to do is the property that we have here, we have to initialize this, right? So how we can initialize this? There is something called ngOnInit. You can either initialize in the constructor or the ngOnInit. ngOnInit is the one of the lifecycle hook that we will talk about all the lifecycle hooks in the upcoming clips, but just for understanding, this is kind of a first method. I would say it's a second method that loads after the component is initialized. Okay, so all booting related stuff, right? All initialization stuffs and all, we used to put it in this place. Okay, we'll talk more about this in a couple of videos. So now what we can do is we can say this dot fruit. So in order to access the properties, you need to use a word called this and then followed by the property name. So here we are saying, so this is an array, so we're going to push some words. All right, so we have these things. Let's initialize this. We initialize this. Now our fruits should have some content here. You see this started showing up the data that we have. Why? Because as I said, to quickly see some data, you can put this in the evaluation and it will evaluate and tell you, and this is going to be evaluated in the JSON format. Great. What else we can do? So if I say dot length, it's going to show you the length of that property, fruits property, which is 4. Great. So now what we are going to do is we are going to use an inbuilt directive called ngFor. So ngFor is nothing but the tag that where you're putting this, the whole section will be repeated for the DOM. So here in this case we have 2 li, right? So if I have to display 100 fruits, I have to literally type 100 times. I don't need to do that. This can be done easily. So for this, what I have to do is I'll say star ngFor, and then what I'm saying is let fruit of fruits, meaning we're going to take each one item of the fruits array variable and put it into a fruit variable temporarily. That is what this let fruit of fruits means. Fruits is the public property that we have, and this is a temporary variable used to collect each data of that fruits property. Okay, so now instead of putting orange, what we will do is we will put an evaluation of fruit. So once we put this, we don't need this extra content. We will remove this. Okay, great. So let's see how this works. It's loading. Great. So we have 5 fruits there, and this is repeated automatically, right? So this we have only one AL. So ideally what this happening is, in order for you to understand, this whole li element is repeated 5 times because 5 fruits are there inside this fruits. That's why you got all these things 5, right? Now let's say we have not initialized this. Now how this looks, if I have not initialized, there is no content here. Let's see. You see there is no content. Let's keep commenting on this for a moment for understanding. Great. there's no content, but there is something called fruits showing up, which is not good. So what we can do is we can use another inbuilt directive called ngIf. So if you say ngIf, inside that if I say this length, length, right? So basically how this Angular will evaluate is, the Angular is very clever. It knows display the whole content, right? This h tag. I would actually put this outside the if. Alright, so I've put under this div tag, which meaning the whole div tag will be removed from the DOM if this condition doesn't satisfy. So in this case, fruits.length is 0. So fruits.length is 0. You can put it and see here. If the length is 0, it is false. They are called falsy and truthy, right? Whenever it is truthy, which means it is true. So in this case, 0 is false. That's why it removes this content from the list, from displaying it, which is nice. We know how this ngIf works, ngFor works. So for a moment, let's undo this. Now, because the length is 5, which is more than 0, it evaluated to truthy, and then the fruits came, and this content also came. All these 4 content came. So we know now what is one-way interpolation, what are the structural directives, which is ngIf, ngFor. Now let's see how this one-way interpolation can be used in a different ways, right? So now what we have done here is we have done the one-way interpolation inside the h tag, right? Now remember, in Angular you can use this property binding to any of the attributes of the HTML element, meaning each HTML element have different attributes. Let's say there is an attribute called inner HTML, and there are attributes like title, src. For an image it will be src, and so on. If I have to bind this property value to the attribute of any of the tag, which is HTML tag, I can use a square bracket and then followed by title. Title is nothing but the property, right? So let's remove this and see how this looks. So I removed it. The inner HTML of h1 tag is now structural directives. See, that's why it's showing us structural directive. This content is ignored. That's how it works. So if I have to put this examples also to display, what you can do is you can go here and say plus followed by single quotes, and then you put the content. Okay, many people get confused with this. If you put a square bracket here, okay, then you don't need to put the evaluation symbol, which is this symbol. Okay, you don't need to put that. Instead you directly put the property name. It will evaluate by itself. That is one thing. And then the moment you say anything inside a single quotes, they will never be evaluated by the Angular. It treats those things as a string. So that's why when you say plus and then followed by space example, it just concatenated the content inside this title property along with the examples. That's why you again got structural directives example. Great. What happens if I hover on it? Nothing happens. What else we can do? There is another property called title. So if I say title and then it happened to be our property name is also title. If I do that and let's load it, let's see what happens. If I hover on it, you can see structural directives is coming as the kind of an alternate text. So that's coming from the title property. You can also see by inspecting here, go to the element, you see this title is embedded, and because the inner HTML is this content, it is automatically put inside the h tag. You see how it works? Nice, right? Next is two-way binding. So to demonstrate the two-way binding, I'm going to copy paste a piece of code here. This is nothing but basically a text box and a button. My intention is to apply two-way binding to this text box, which we'll see right away. And then as you type here, we wanted to filter the content in this list. Okay, as if that we're filtering on a list of items. So now how two-way binding works is, it works like this. You need to have a variable. Okay, so in this case we will take a simple example of variable. So I'll come to the component and I will have a variable called search fruit, which is of type string. So now what we will do is we will go to the HTML here. In order to apply two-way binding, there's something called a ngModel. So you need to open the bracket and then parenthesis. Inside this you have to say ngModel followed by the property name. In our case it is search fruit, right? Now the search fruit property is bind to this input tag, and that's going to be a two-way binding. How do I know that? So if I come here and apply this here, you can see the live changes happening. So let's say I'm going to type here. As I type here, you can see that's also displayed on the UI. That's called two-way binding. So what is the other way of two-way binding? You can take the same text, go to this component, and if you place it here, you can see this is bound to this input as a two-way binding. So it will start coming here. You see it started coming here, it started coming to the bottom also. And you start editing this, it will display. So that's the power of the two-way binding. Great. Now what we are going to do is we're going to filter the content based on what you're typing in the text box. There is something called ngModelChange. So ngModelChange is a powerful event that gets triggered whenever you have an ngModel. So in this case, we need to have a data change method, which is of type string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly go to the component and type that a function which accepts data of type string. And then once you have this, the error goes away. And here what we are going to do is we are going to filter the text. So based on the text that you type, you're going to filter. So I'm going to copy paste the code and explain you what it is. So basically what we are going to do is we are going to filter the fruits object. It start with the lowercase. It should be a lowercase and it should start with what you're typing, or anything that you type, it should be within the index of that content. So that is what this code is doing. So once you filter this, we will apply this to fruits itself, which is the public property. Now if you come back to the model here, so right now you see this learn smart coding, it's typing here, right? So what we will do, we will say banana. Once I say banana, our ngModelChange event fired and it filtered literally everything from that. So only one is left. That is what it is repopulated. So if I go back and say an, it is not repopulating. So that's because once the data is filtered, we don't have anything that has been repopulated. So let's do a quick refactoring. So I'm going to cut this and say populate fruits, and then let's do this. So what this is going to do is this is going to reset the fruits and then populate the fruits. Every time we start filtering, we will first reset the fruits and we'll filter it. So this way it is guaranteed to have the content. All right, so you can see here what we're going to do is we're going to filter with an. So an is an orange and banana, so it's coming. If I say banana, it's just banana. What else? See, it's filtering instantly, right? Or a is an orange and grapes. Great. So that is the power of the two-way binding and applying the filter using the ngModel. Now the last thing that we're going to see in this topic is the event binding. Event binding, before I give an example, it's basically we are going to bind something to the event on the HTML. So let's take an example of button. In this case, there's a button called add fruit. Now when you click on a button, which is a single click, there will be an event triggered. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to bind an event to a method, and then that method will be triggered once the event is fired. So in our case, if you go back here and go back to the button add fruit, all what you need to do is you need to use the inbuilt events. So if you see a button, inbuilt event is on click, on double click, on blur, all those things. You have to remember this when you use the events in the Angular. Use just the click, double click, do not use on. So in order to use the event binding, you need to put the event inside the parenthesis. So here in my case it's click event, and I'm saying it should call add fruit. That's it. And then we will take the content from the another text box. So now we have an event which is add fruit. So add fruit is not exist in the component, that's why it's throwing you error. So let's go here and say add fruit, and which is just an event. So method which is going to add this, right? So it's going to take the content of this one. So we will have an ngModel called new fruit, which is bound to a different control. So we'll go here, we will say this dot fruits, dot push. That's it. So new fruit. So we will add this new fruit to the top. Okay, so let's remove this default content. Okay, so this is the filter and this is the content. And if I say I need to add a fruit called green grapes, I added the green grapes into this. Seedless grapes, right? I can keep adding. It's keep adding to the same object, right? So this is how the event binding works. So we are binding a function to a particular event. In this case, it's just a single click. All right, and if you start filtering here, all grapes will come. No, only one grapes is going to come because the one that we added here, it's all reset. So for example, seedless grapes is here, but once you do this, if you remember, we have a method here which resets everything and push only these four, right? So all right, so now you know, in this video you saw interpolation, one-way binding, two-way binding, and you also saw event binding. Great, now you should have some good knowledge in this, and as we develop different modules, I'll explain you about pipes and other different things how you can use in terms of interpolations, and how to use the other directives called ng class, and so many things. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Learn Smart Coding. In this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a component called cosines, and then we're going to fill up this section, only the top section, right? All these different cosines, and when you hover on it, you could see different cosine descriptions under this. So this is one component. We will cover this component, followed by I'll show you in the next clip how to use HTTP service to call the external API and show these data. Come, without delay, let's get started. So in order to create cosine component, I'm going to create a directory called menu under the app. So I'll go create a folder called menu, and under menu we're going to create a component using the CLI command. If you remember in the third clip that I showed you, let's go and do it. We created a cosine component under the menu folder, which is here, which is also auto registered here. So what I'm going to do is so just for the demo purpose, if we have to show this cosine components before we add any route mechanism here, all what we need to do is use this selector and go to the app component, and we're just going to replace the cosine component. So whatever is in this HTML, it's going to show here. See, cosine works. Great. We're going to replace some HTML here and do some magics to bring up that UI. I'm going to copy paste a simple HTML code, and then I'll explain you what it is. So if you look at this, this is a plain HTML with a minimum CSS taken from the Bootstrap side. So this is nothing but a pill, a nav pill. So you can see I've added a hashtag, and then this is the nav pill, right? Indian, Thai, Italian. So right now I've copy pasted everything manually. We're going to automate this, and then a description here about, so if you click on Thai, it should say about Thai cosines, and then some details of the Thai question, right? So how do we achieve this? So in order to achieve this, we are going to call an external API in the next clip, which will return a list of the cosine details. So for this clip, we are going to simulate that content by ourselves, and then in the next clip I'll show you how HTTP service is used to invoke all these APIs. Okay, so let's first create a model folder under the app. So this will have all the models. So the first model that I'm going to create is the cosine.model.ts, or I would say just cosine ts under the model. So we have this, and what we have to do is we need to say export interface. That's an interface, and then cosine is the class, the interface name, and these are the properties of that. Now we have the cosine, so let's go to the menu cosine. So here, so what we need to do is we need to have an array of cosines so that we can display all this Indian, this Thai, Italian, Chinese, Greek, whatever it is. So I will create a public property called cosines, which is of type cosine array. So and I will initialize this. That's it. So this one is nothing but the one that we created here, right? If you press F12, you can go to the implementation here. So now come back here. If you remember, we have seen how ngFor works, which is an inbuilt structural directive. So we're going to apply that here and repeat this content. Let's say I wanted to highlight a particular menu. If the user is selecting a Thai cosines or Italian cosine, right? So you need to just add an active class here, and as soon as you add an active class here, you see this got highlighted. If I cut this and put it here, the second one will be highlighted, which means basically that is the one which is selected, right? So let's remember that, and then I'll come back and explain you why I told you this. So now we're going to repeat this using the ngFor. Let's apply this item of cosine. So I will put this as plurals. Great, it's already there. So cosine. So we have this one. So what we are going to do is we're going to use this item and then apply here. So in this case, we will put the open bracket double time item dot name. From where this name is coming, if you remember, go to this property. There's something called name here. This is the name property that we are going to use it. So let's come here and we'll apply a name property. Great. And then let's remove all these things. Okay, let's see if something is coming up. Do we have anything in cosines? We don't have anything in cosines, right? So ideally nothing should come. Great, nothing come. So what we will do is we will populate this. So in order to populate this, let's say get cosines. We will create a method. In this one, we will just add couple of items for time being. So let's use a constant keyword and then declare a variable called item1 of type cosine, and then it is equal to 1. Let's say name. ID is 1, name is, description is, great. So we pushed one item. However, we did not call this. So once you have this, let's put this inside this ng on in it. So which means it's going to be called once the component is activated. Great. So you started seeing something coming up here, right? Great. Now how do we put the description here? So all what we need to do is we need to go back here and then we need to apply this here. So we'll do that. So let's add a couple of items quickly. Okay, so we will see 4 things here. It's loading. So we need to add item 2, item 3, item 4. All 4 different items has been added, and you can see 4 different things coming up here, right? All right. So now what I want is when a user hovers on any of these, I wanted to instantly change what was hovered here, so that if someone is hovering on Italian cosine details will be showed here, and similarly Chinese and other things, right? So in order to do that, I'm going to copy paste some code and then explain you what it is. Let me explain you what I have done here. So I've added 2 more properties called selected cosine. So when someone is hitting a click here or hovering on it, I wanted to hold that particular item in a variable. That's why I've named as selected cosine, and that's of type cosine. The next one is I've added a model called menu item, and this menu active item is something is customized that I have done just to hold the variables and the metadata of these things, which is currently active, which is not active, which is active and which is not active currently. just to hold that information. So I have two methods here. One is set active menu and one is get active menu. So let me explain you what this is, right? So I've added a bunch of code here. So what this code is doing is, once we add these 4 items here, we are going to loop through all the item, and then I'm going to create for each item a menu ID and push that into a new object called menu item list here, right? Which will initially hold all the items here and then its data. I'll show you that how it works. So for example, if I go and say menu item list and display here for your understanding, see, so basically what this piece of code is doing is, so it will go through each and every item and basically it will say everything is active. So before I explain this piece of code, what I'm going to do is, I've pasted this JSON content so that you can see what is happening here, and let's change this to a different ID because each ID will have a different number. So we got 1 2 3 4 number, right? So once we add these 4 items to the list, what this will do is, it will navigate to each and every item and it will add a custom generated ID and it will set everything to false. Once it sets everything to false, it will go and pick the second item and set it to true. So if you see this, everything is false except the second item. That is what this piece of code is doing, 37 line number. Okay, so now this one, the next method is set active and get active. So set active menu is, from the UI we are going to pass a particular cosine based on what has been hovered here, and that one, it will go through to this item list and it will set that particular item to true and all the item to false. So this list will hold active and inactive items based on the selection that you will see in the action shortly. So once we have these codes ready, let's go back to the HTML code. So here what we are going to do is, we're going to put an event here. So this one, if you have seen in the previous clip, this is called event binding. For mouse hover, I have called two items. Whenever mouse hover is happening, I'm going to pass this particular item. This item is nothing but one of the item here, right? So let me hover it and see. So if I hover here, you can see here results. You can see this is changing. You see this? The first one is true, second one is true, third, fourth, and it's keep changing. Why it's keep changing? Whenever mouse over is happening, I'm calling two methods. One is the get menu class and one is the set menu class, set active menu. So in set active menu, this logic has been done. It will navigate through each and every item and it will just set and reset all the items, right? It will set the particular item to true, whichever is hovered here, and all the other items to false. Get menu class, what this will do is, it will pass here, and whenever a particular item is matched, it is going to return a true or false, just a boolean. Okay, so why we are going to do this is, we are going to dynamically add active class here. So if I have active class here, unfortunately, because this is a repeated loop, the active class is added, sorry, not here. So if I delete this and add active class here, what this will happen is, it will set active to all the one. I don't want this to happen. I want this blue color active thing to come only when I hover on it, right? So how do we do this dynamically? How do we add a particular CSS class dynamically? This is another attribute called ng class. So what we are going to do is, we are going to apply an ng class here. So let's say, so ng class. So this expression, what this is doing is, it is going to pass this item to this method and it is going to see whether it is true or false. And whenever a true is going to come, the active class, which is between a single quotes, will be added here automatically. So whenever the item is true, it is going to return a true, and whenever there is a true, the active class will be added automatically here. Okay, You see this, the Indian cosine is already activated. That's because second item is true. And take a look at this. The first item is true and this became active. This became active. This became active. So nice. This is something that I've done custom. You can do based on your project need. I just want to show you different examples. So this is one of the examples that I wanted to show you. You wrote your custom methods and we manipulated the DOM. So the active class is added to the spill based on our need. Correct? Great. So now how do we display the details here, the description here? If you notice, in set active method, what we are doing is based on what is selected, we are putting into the selected cosine. So if you copy this cosine and come here, and instead of tie cosine, what I will do is I will dynamically put selected cosine dot name. Now let's refresh. Great. And then I wanted to put some content here, correct? So I'll copy this and put it here and just replace the property description. All right, you saw, you started saying this. Let's remove this first time being, so it looks good. Great. I hover on it, that description came. I hover on this description came. Based on what you're hovering, you got a different description here, right? And these colors are coming because I added some CSS here. Just for example, some two CSS which is used in this HTML. Title heading and title subheading. That's why you could see two different colors here. All right, nice. You saw something here. So we achieved the inbuilt directives called ngFor and ngClass, some data binding. We know how to manipulate the data. Let's take a moment and think. When we call an API, sometimes there could be a delay. Let's stimulate that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a set timeout. I'm going to call a set timeout and going to give an interval of 2 seconds, which is 2000 milliseconds. And then after 2 seconds only I'm going to call this, which means when something initially, let's, for a visual reference, let's put 5 seconds. So until 5 seconds, no data is coming here, right? This doesn't look good. So how do we pretend that something is happening? Easy. What we can do is we can apply the ngIf condition to this div so that this cosine is not coming, because I've added a length property here. Initially the length is 0, so nothing is coming, but still this is not looking good, right? We need to show something for the user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply another ngIf and say please loading, please wait. See, for the 5 seconds, this is the div tag which is going to be displayed. As soon as the 5 seconds is over, which means we are pretending that data came late, right? This entire content will be shown and this content will be removed. Great, good, looks good. So you learned something new here. Great. In the next topic, we're going to cover how to use the HTTP service to pull up all these records from the external API. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Learn Smart Coding. In this video, I'm going to talk about lifecycle hooks in Angular. So what are lifecycle hooks? A component instance has a lifecycle that starts when Angular instantiates the component class and renders the component view along with its child view. Meaning, the lifecycle continues with change detection. As Angular checks to see when data-bound property changes, like the input, and updates both the views and the component instance as needed. The lifecycle ends when Angular destroys the component instance and removes its rendering template from the DOM. When you navigate to a different route, the component gets destroyed. So there are different lifecycle hooks in Angular, around 8 lifecycle hooks. So we're going to talk about 8 lifecycle hooks and the details of each and every lifecycle hook, the purpose of the lifecycle hook, and at what time it triggers. Those things are clearly mentioned in the Angular documentation. I will provide the link and also the screenshot of what was mentioned here. But I'm going to quickly show you a demo and we will see all these things in action. So here's my demo app. in this demo app, I've opened the application which is already running. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace a particular component, and in that place I'm going to put all the lifecycle hooks and show you how the events are getting triggered. So for that, so I'll go and create an event lock interface, and then I'm going to use that event lock interface as an array in the food item component. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to start writing all the lifecycle hooks events. So there are two lifecycle hook already in place, which is on init and on changes. Apart from these two, there are 6 more lifecycle hook. So the third lifecycle hook is the do check. After do check, it is after content init, followed by after content checked, and the next one is the after view init, followed by after view checked, and the last one is on destroy. So the on destroy is the last lifecycle hook. So the order I have given in the details. So now if you see, we need to implement all these lifecycle hooks. So you can just refactor this by implementing all the lifecycle hooks. I'm going to copy paste a piece of code in each of the lifecycle hook, which will basically push some lock to the event lock local public variable, so that we can navigate that each item and see how it is displaying. So here you see all the implementation for each lifecycle hook has been placed. So this basically puts some nice message into our log, and we are going to put that log into our HTML code. So this is the CSS just to decorate, to have some differentiation. So now if you see this, once I have my code placed here, the component loaded, and you can immediately see all the different colors of logs. So each color represent a particular log generated by a particular lifecycle hook, and you can see how it is evaluated, like whichever has the first one. So the first one in our lifecycle hook is ngOnChange, so that's why you see that as the first item in the log. And similarly all the lifecycle hooks, it's placed here. So now see, the logs got generated more because I was hovering something on the top menu. Whenever some input changes, the lifecycle hooks are triggered accordingly, and each time the lifecycle hooks are triggered, I'm placing it a different log there. Right now you can see number one through everything, and you can see the order: ngOnChange, on init, do check, after content init, all these things. These are the order that we placed while we did the implementation. Now what happens now? There is a constructor also in our component, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste the same code, the log code, and put it into the constructor and see what happens, whether the constructor is triggered first or not, right? So once I put this piece of code, and the component is going to get loaded, and you can see the content of the constructor coming up. The first one in our log is now the constructor. You see this event constructor triggered, and you can also see at what time it triggered. Great. So these lifecycle hooks are very important as you develop. So you should know which lifecycle to use and when to use. The most commonly used lifecycle hooks are ngOnChange, ngOnInit, onDestroy. These are the most commonly used lifecycle hooks. So I'm going to explain you a couple of important lifecycle hooks. The first lifecycle hook that will trigger is the ngOnChange. So it will respond when Angular sets or resets a data bound input property. So whenever you have an input property in any of the component, and if that input property gets different values from the calling component, right, this lifecycle hook will trigger, and you can see the changes happening. Anything that is placed inside this lifecycle hook, the code will be triggered, and you can see this in the next clip where I'm demonstrating the input and the output functionality of a component. Okay, now the next one that will get triggered is ngOnInit. So ngOnInit is kind of initializing the component. So it initializes the directive or component after Angular first displays the data bound properties and sets the directive or component's input property. So the next important lifecycle hook is ngOnDestroy. So this is something that where you will put all the cleanup code, like cleaning up your subscription, and anything that you wanted to change, remove the observables, right, unsubscribe the observables, and redash some event handlers, for avoiding the memory leak, for all those things, you put those piece of code into this lifecycle hook, and this lifecycle hook will be triggered when a component is destroyed. When you navigate from one route to a different route where the component is no more in the DOM, this will be triggered. And for all the rest of the lifecycle hooks, you can go through the documentation, and as you develop, you can see the changes and you can implement by yourself and see what happens to those lifecycle hooks. Make sure you don't put any piece of a logic in just in all the lifecycle hooks. They are very dangerous. Every time, every milliseconds, I would say nanoseconds, these events are triggered. So whatever you are placing it, you need to be careful. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Learn Smart Coding. In this video, I'm going to cover how to use the HTTP service and call the external APIs to show some data onto your application. Before I go ahead and explain you about HTTP service in deep, let me show you an external API which I have developed as part of .NET Core Web API series, and we are going to consume those APIs into this project. This is the URL of the Swagger for the restaurant app. I'll give you those details in the description. So if you look at here, we have different APIs exposed like categories, cosines, food menu under each cosines, and under the food menu you could get different images for each food, right? We're going to consume most of these APIs in our application. The first one that we will consume is this cosine. So what this is doing, when we call this cosine API, let's try it out right away, right? It's loading. It returns some data. You see this Italian, Indian, Chinese, Thai cosines, and these are the properties that we developed in the previous clip, and we manually added some data to show our UI, right? So in general, before you consume any of the API, go and check always the API response, the properties and the structure, and I would suggest you to create exactly same model into your UI side. So in my case, you can see this ID, name, description is active, or the 4 properties that come under the cosine interface, exactly same. The reason why it is good to have exactly same property name is when you consume these things via observables, it will match property to property. If you don't have the property names exactly same, you need to manually map those properties, meaning which property goes to which property. You need to tell that. To avoid that, it is preferable to have same property name exposed by the API. Come, let's get started into this HTTP service. What is HTTP service? See, most of the front-end application, like what we are developing now, right, needs to communicate with the server side over HTTP protocol to download or upload data and access other backend services. So Angular provides a client HTTP API for Angular applications. Since ours is Angular application, we can use HTTP client servers class under the module called Angular Common HTTP. So the HTTP client service offers the ability to request typed response object. In this case, we can see cosines or food menu or all those things. They're all typed response object. Streamlined error handling. If something goes wrong when we invoke and then we don't retrieve some data, it is very easy to handle the errors. We can test it. We can intercept the request and response. Now we heard some story. Now it's time to be in action. So where do we start? In general, the application that we are developing is a small one. So in our case, we will directly say we'll create a folder called services, and under services we can create a service called cosine.service.ts. However, if you are in a bigger project in your company, right, the best way to have these services is under each module. We will also shortly create modules for this menu. In next 2 clips, we will end up seeing a module created in our app. So it is preferable to have the services for those module in the module itself. Whichever services are common across the application, it is best to put it outside the module, which is what we are doing now. In our case, it's a small application and we really don't need to have it inside a module because we don't have a module now, right? So we will create it. How do we create it? We just need to create a class called cosine service and export it. So export class cosine service, and then the next important thing that we need to do is we need to mark this class with a decorator called injectable. So injectable is something, a decorator which Angular provides, and as soon as any class marked with injectable, Angular exactly knows how to inject this class whenever a component or any other services is requesting this via dependency injection. Dependency injection is most powerful one in Angular, and we're going to make use of that. So what we need to do is we need to say provided in, and we can provide this as root. I'll explain you more in detail of the services works with different providers. For now, what we are going to do is we are saying this class is injectable and we are providing this at the root level. In our case, the root level is nothing but the app module. Okay, so think of this as a family tree, right? Grandparent, parent, children, grandchildren, and so on. In this case, our app module is kind of a grandparent. We are providing this to the grandparent. So grandparent can provide this service to anyone under them, which could be their son, their grandson, or whatever it is, whichever is lower than the grandparent, right? That's what this is doing in simple English. I'll explain you technically what it is. So bear with me for a second. Now what we are going to do is we are going to create a private variable called API URL, and which is of type string, and then a default constructor. I formatted this code. Now what we are going to do is dependency injection. So how dependency injection works? In the constructor, if you ask for any service which is of type injectable, the Angular will provide us. We are going to inject an HTTP client service offered by Angular. So in this case, I will put a private variable called HTTP, and I'm asking Angular to provide me HTTP client service, right? I'll bring in this namespace by control period. It's not coming, so you can click here. Sometimes it used to come. If not, what we need to do is we need to import this under Angular common and under HTTP. See, the error went off. So now we injected HTTP client service into this constructor of this service. Similarly, whoever is asking this service will have this cosine service added to their constructor. We will see how to use this in the common component, the cosine component that we have, and we will see how to invoke the methods. Now what we need to do is we are going to create a method called getCosines. And what this method will do is, this method doesn't have any input parameter. However, it is going to return of type observable of array of cosines. I'll explain you what is observable of cosines, right? What is observable pattern? We are using RxJS in our Angular, and the observable comes under the RxJS. So I'm going to explain you what is observable before we further write some code. Think of this. Observable is something that a pattern which has been observed, a subscriber model pattern. Now, if you're watching this video in YouTube, there are plenty of things that comes that subscribe to my channel, right? Let's say you're subscribing to my channel. I am the publisher, you are the subscriber. What YouTube will do, whenever I publish, if there are some subscribers, it is going to intimate to them that such so-and-so video has been posted by so-and-so channel, right? In this case, YouTube is Angular. I am the one who is the publisher, right? Which is like a caller, and subscriber is the application who is calling that method, right? So now what will happen is whenever we invoke an external call, we will invoke and leave it. Once the data comes, whoever has subscribed, to every single person, in our case to every single caller, the data will be given by the Angular. So in this case, our cosine data will be given to the callers. I hope you understood. What we are going to do is we are going to say constant. We'll format an URL, which is the URL of this cosine. So let's put this. So if you look at this, I'm going to copy this. I don't want all these things. I just want until here. So this is my URL. This is my URL, and you need to access the HTTP client variable using this dot http, there's a spelling mistake, dot, all the methods of the http is being displayed here: delete, get, put, post, patch, everything. In our case it's a get, so we will say get, and then we simply need to pass the URL and the headers. So headers are optional because this API doesn't have any strong authentication for practicing purpose. You don't need to send any token or any specific headers, but in general when you use real-time bigger APIs you need to append some headers, only then it will work. So headers is optional, we are going to use only the URL here. And then right, so this is going to return the data once it receives the data. What we can do is, I have a method which extracts this data, so let me copy paste this method. So we are going to simply call the get array, which is this method. It is going to pass the URL. This is going to trigger an HTTP GET call, and pipe and map are the operators of the RSJS. So we'll explain you more about just pipe and map in the RSJS video, but basically what this is doing is, pipe is some kind of a pipeline. So data will flow through the pipe. So when it flows through the pipe, it goes to the map. Map is nothing but a method which maps property to property. So in this we are saying map all the data based on the property, and then it returns this. This is a generic method, and then we're going to make use of this. So we're going to call this and receive this data. We have the method ready. So now how do we use this? Let's go to the cosine component. Here if you see, we manually added some content here. So instead of this, what we are going to do is, we are going to remove all this content, and simply we are going to say, right, we injected the cosine service, so we make use of this. So when I say this dot cosine service dot get cosines, and then you're calling this method. If you call this method and leave it, right, there is no subscribers. So it's like that same concept. If I'm uploading and if no subscribers, my video will not be delivered to anyone, correct? So we cannot leave this here. Once we call this method, there's a method called subscribe. Once you say subscribe, and we are saying when the data comes, please add that data to my cosine. That's it. This is what I'm saying. So once the data is ready, it will call and it will assign the data to the cosine. Great. You can see this is loading here. Looks there's some error. Let's take a look. Okay, so we did everything correct. There was no error in the coding, and you still see some error here, right? Good, we got some error. Let's identify what is this. In this error, there is something meaningful, says it's no provider for HTTP client. It did not say no provider for our service. It says no provider for the HTTP client. So something I have missed it. So what I have missed is this. If you come to the app module, you need to import a module called HTTP client module. HTTP client module, which is from the Angular. Once I add this to my app module, the error went. There are different errors, that's okay, but the main error went. Now what is missing is, before the data came, we started doing something here. So what we're going to do is, we're going to cut this content and put this inside this one. So in order to put this more than one line of code, we open this bracket and put this, and we also cut this and put it here. Cut this. Great. So we added this. Please wait is coming because this method is called after 5 seconds. We don't need to call this after 5 seconds. Let's cut this. We don't need all these things. I'm going to format the code. I formatted the code. So how do you format the code? Control A selects everything, and then Control K, Control F will format the code. It will prettify. Great. You see this data coming. So how do I know? If I go to F12, which is developers tool, under the network section, I'll clear everything. Let's save this and reload and see. So I saved it. It's reloading. When the app component, you see this, there is a call went outside. This is the HTTP call went outside. So this is calling the external URL and it received these data. And that's why you're seeing these different results. Great. Now if I hover on it, you see the actual results coming from the HTTP response. In next video, we are going to talk about how to pass data from your parent component to a nested child component and receive some information from your child component to your parent component. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use nested components like parent component and a child component, and how to pass data from your parent to the child, and also how to get events from your child to the parent. So we're going to make use of input and output from Angular and going to demo how to make this work. So if you look at this website, what we are going to do is when you hover on a particular cosine, I'm going to invoke a particular API and receive all the information of that particular cosine. So under this Italian cosine, whatever food items are there, they're going to be retrieved and they're going to display it in one component. That component, we will use it inside the cosine components. So cosine component is a parent. The food items for that particular cosine will be the child component. And if you look at this, when you hover on any of these food items, right, you can see the data changing here. And it also tells you from which cosine it is. You can see that we're going to use that logic as well. Now come, without delay, let's get started. Okay, now I'm going to create a component called food items. So for that, ng generate component food items. Looks, there was a spelling mistake. I'm going to delete that and create a proper name. Okay, it is getting generated. All right, great, got generated. Let's delete the one which we don't want. So we deleted this. We have to go here and remove that manually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the food items, and then here what we are going to do is we are going to make use of a property called cosine ID. CUISINE cosine ID. I wanted to know which cosine has been hovered, the mouse hovered by the user or selected by the user. So this is a cosine ID and it's of type number. Great. Now what we are going to do is we are going to decorate this with the attribute called input. Let's bring in the namespace. Okay, format the code. Right. The moment you declare input for a particular property, which means you can pass some data to this property from another component. Now what I'm going to quickly do is, based out of this API, I'm going to create some models, and I'm going to create the services for the categories, and I'm going to create some services for the food menus. And once I have all those things ready, which you can watch now, once everything is ready, we will see how to make use of this. So basically what I've done is I created a couple of models based out of the APIs that I have, and like categories, the food items, the food menu, right? And then I also created a couple of services for categories, separate service, food menu services separately. And if you look at the food menu services, the small difference that you can see from the previous clip is I am taking this API URL from the environment variable. So where do you find this environment variable? Environment variable can be found here. These variables are used based on your build location. So if you're building this application for different environments like dev, QA, staging, production, there will be 4 different files for all those environment, and based on what each environment has value, those will be dynamically present in the build. In our case, this is a simple application. What I've done is I've come to the core and added a model called interface environment configuration interface. Here I have a couple of properties, API URL, endpoint names and other things, and I'm making use of that under my environment variable here. So this will force me to implement each property of this interface, which is nothing but these properties, right? So if you see, this is my API URL and these are the controller's action methods, the final endpoint. So I'm going to format these two in the services here. If you look at here, it's going to call the particular API by formatting the URL like this. That is what I've done. You can go through this code. It is very simple. Whatever we did in cosine services is what we have done it in other services as well. So now let's take a moment. If you look at this particular API, if you pass the cosine ID, let's say the cosine ID is 1, which is Italian, I believe. And if you pass this endpoint will return all the data, all the food items for particular cosine, right? You can see all this details. So what we are going to do is we're going to call this API, pass this data dynamically and get all the data back, and we are going to display these food items here. That is what we're going to do. Now that's a completed app, and this is the app that I'm building for you. Now let's take a moment. What we're going to do is we created a component called food items, right? So if you come to food items here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some numbers randomly for now. Okay, so I'm saying it's 1, which is the default cosine ID, and then I'm going to paste a piece of code and explain you what it is. So basically what we're doing is we're going to add all the missing properties. All right, so basically I have a couple of things like food menu arrays, the category arrays, and I'm injecting the category servers, the food menu service. We don't need router for now. So we have injected and we have used a couple of things. We have injected 2 services and we have 2-3 methods. So what these methods are doing is, one method is calling a food menu service and invoking all the data based on the cosine ID. The other one is simply retrieving all the categories. That's a separate API. If you look at here, this is the one that I'm using, get categories all. In one of my video I showed you how lifecycle hooks works. So here we are going to use 2 lifecycle hooks. One is the ngOnInit and the other one is ngOnChanges. So ngOnChanges is the first lifecycle hook that gets triggered and will always triggers whenever there is a input changes happens. In our case the input is cosine ID. So in this component what we are doing is when a particular so we are doing is, let's do this. So in this component what we will do is we'll go and invoke our services manually for a particular cosine ID, which is cosine ID 1. So in order to see the output, what I will do is I will take this component selector, which is nothing but the food items. I'll go to the cosine service and use the component here. And if we go to this demo, you see some items, this nested component started displaying, right? This is the parent component when we have another component that's called nested component. We're going to bring in all the data here. I have a simple HTML code which I'm going to copy paste. If you see what this code is doing is we are triggering the 1 cosine ID here and it is by default calling all the data, right? And even if you hover on it, this data is not going to change because we literally hard coded this, right? We hard coded this as 2, then the second cosine ID is sent and that data will be displayed. You see this, but if you hover on it, nothing is going to happen. So this is what we are going to achieve. When you hover on it, we're going to pass this data to this component, the child component, and then the child component will then trigger the particular cosine ID. So in order to make use of this, we have to access that property from this location. So you need to access that property using the square bracket, and then you can pass the ID of it. So here the selected cosine is the one that holds the current selected item. So if we say selected cosine.id, this ID will be passed. What we are going to do is we are going to go to that component, and then we will remove the default value, which is 2. So once I remove the default value, it's going to accept that, it's going to get sent. So if I hover this, there's no data change, right? So the reason why it is not happening is the change detection will happen in one of the lifecycle hook, which is ngOnChange. So basically we need to put this into the ngOnChange, not on the ngOnInit. So once we apply that logic here, you can see the second one is triggered. If I hover on it, the third call is triggered. And you can see when I hover on Chinese, the Chinese related food items are coming. Hover on this one, differents are coming, right? All the different items are coming based on what you're hovering on it. That's how the change detection happens. You would have seen this in the lifecycle hook video. You can uncomment this to see how the changes are done. What is the previous value of this cosine ID and what is the present value of this cosine ID. Alright, so now what we have to do is there's something called output attribute. If you use the output attribute, you can communicate something from your child component to your parent component. That is what we are going to see next. Now we will have a public property called onHoverFoodItem. So public onHoverFoodItem is the name, and which is of type new event emitter, and here we are going to emit a food item which was selected. So we need to mark this property with an attribute called output. So @output. So this is showing error because we have an incorrect namespace. So let's bring in the right namespace. So event emitter from angler.core. Okay, so we have this output public property on hover food item, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to intimate to our caller and emit a particular food item whichever was selected. Okay, so basically when I hover on this samosa or tandoori chicken, I wanted to emit this information that tandoori chicken, which is nothing but a food menu item, has been hovered on it. So in order to do that, I need a method called onItemHover. So what this method is doing is, so this method is going to emit the food item based on you hover it. So we need to call this method from our HTML element. So let's come to the HTML element. What we are going to do is whenever you hover on this item, I'm going to put a mouse over event and say I pass on this item to this method. So now what will happen? This method is called and this item is emitted. So how do we make use of this? So now, like I said, the input property, you need to use it in the consuming application. So in this, the component whichever is used here, you can pass a content into an input variable by using a square bracket. Similarly, whenever you use this component, if you have to use the output component, you need to use that in the parenthesis. So in our case, it is onHoverFoodItem. So if I go here to this cosine component and come to the child component, I'll open the bracket, I'll open the parenthesis and put onHoverFoodItem, and I'll call it as a name. I will call this as a name and then pass on an event. So once you pass an event, you need to have the same method into the cosine component. So let's put in that method. So let's have that method here. I have a method and I have a food menu, which is nothing but the input type. So I'll bring in the namespace and I'm going to make use of a food menu hovered property, and that is of type food menu. Great. So now this one will tell you what was hovered at that point of time, right? So if I come here quickly, what I can do is I can quickly paste a piece of code. Let's say I'm hovering on this, so I want to display what was hovered. Okay, there's something wrong. So I need to put this mouse hover here. So I have it placed properly. So if I come to the cosine model, now whenever I hover on it, you see this, the data is emitted and I'm displaying the data here. So it basically displays the name of the content and its description based out of its category. Right, so the selected cosine has the name of the cosine that is selected. In this case it's Chinese, and if I hover on it, it clearly says tandoori chicken is from Chinese cosine, and this says bread is from Italian cosine. Indian cosine, you can see the similar one. Thai cosine, you can see special cake from Thai cosine. Great. So in this video you saw how to create component, how to create nested components, how to pass data from your parent to the child, and also emit something or intimate what was selected or what happened from your child component to your parent component. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you. In next clip, we will talk about routing and how to navigate to different routings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Learn Smart Coding. In this video, we're going to see how to apply routing in our application and also how we will navigate from one page to a different page using a different route. Along with that, we will also see how to build a new module and import that module into our main app module. Now, without delay, let's get started. So we are back in our application. In app.html, we used to put the components directly to display the end result. So we are going to replace the middle part and put the routing here, and then we will see how the content are getting replaced dynamically based on the route. I'm going to create a new file under the app folder and name it as app.routing.module. It's basically a module file. So we're going to create an app routing module file. So I have installed an Angular extension by John Papa. That extension will help you to bring in a piece of snippet, and then from that snippet of code you can make use of that. So in order to bring in a snippet of code, I just say a-module and then it brings me a snippet of code. That's because of that extension. So I type my module name app routing and then delete the unwanted thing. Here the unwanted things are the component and the component in the declaration. So I don't need all those things. I'm going to remove all those things and then have only the required app module and required app routing module. So I deleted everything. So now what we are going to do is we need to now apply a route. So route is from Angular and it accepts an array of routes. So each route will define the path and the component to go. So now we declare a constant variable called routes and then that's an array of type. So the first route that we'll bring in is the default route. So the path is just an empty string, which means no one types anything after the website name. And we are saying the full match pattern, which is match pattern as full. So when there's nothing after the domain name, we consider that as the empty string and the match pattern is full. And we say we redirect such path to a path called home path. Now we will define the next route as home. So the path will be a home, which means the website name / home. And then the component that we need to use for this route is the home component. So we declare the home component for the component property. So we have two things. The next thing is we need to import this route into the app routing module. So for that, under imports, we will say router.forRoute. So we will say router module.forRoute. For route basically means it's under the main root, which is like a parent level. So we apply that routes inside that and then we export this app module itself, this app routing module. Okay, because we already have an export and then the export that is there inside the module is the router module. So basically we need router module and this routing module. So both are present in the same one. So that's why we import that app routing module into our main app module. Okay, so whatever is exported also has come, whatever we imported in the previous module also has been imported here. Now what we need to do is we need to apply a router outlet into the main content where we used to put the component. So router dash outer, that is the Angular one that we need to use it for our routing. So we applied this. Great. See, everything started loading. The default home page has been brought up because there was nothing inside the because there was nothing after the domain name, so it brought to the default path, which is home. Now to make more demonstration, let's apply or let's create new components for about and contact us. Let's say we have two pages called contact us and about page. So we will quickly create using the CLI command. If you remember, it is ng generate component followed by the component path and component name. So here in this case, under the core, I would like to create two components called about us and the contact us. So I'm going to create ng generate component. Under the core, I will create the contact us first. It's building. The component got generated. The next component that we will create is the about us. Alright, we got two components created, which is under the core component, under the core folder. You see, there are two components, and these two components automatically got declared into the app module because of the CLI command. Now, what we have to do is we have to go to the header component and where the navigation is there, right? So we need to apply a router link. Router link is also again from the routing module where we will assign a route for a particular hyperlink. So when you click on the particular hyperlink called home, it will take you to the route called /home. So /home, you know, as soon as the URL changes to /home, the router will kick in and it will try to match the router path that we have defined already. And as soon as the path matches, it is going to take and put that component into the router outlet path. If you remember, the router outlet is under app component.html. Now we will quickly place two more routes called about us and contact us, and we declare exactly whatever we put into this router link is what the router also will have. So remember, the wordings should match. So let's take a moment and see how we are going to define the path. Now back to our router. So let's copy paste, and two times we can use the same thing for two routes that we have. One is the contact and another one is the about us. Here if you see, the path is contact us. This path should match what you have declared in the router link. So the second one is the about. So I will change this to about. Great, I applied both the components. Now you have these things. Let's take a look at the UI and see how it looks. Back to our UI, you can see the contact us and the about us page, and I'm clicking on the contact us. It took me to the contact us template. So if you remember, the contact us component doesn't have anything now, so it just got replaced in the center. That's why the home component went away and the contact us came inside the middle. That's how the routing works. See, if you click on about us, the about us component will be replaced in the center. So Angular will actually swap the components based on the routing mechanism that you put. Now what we are going to do is we are going to create a menu module under the menu, and we'll see how to do the menu module and import it into the main module. So back to the code, it is all same. I'm going to use the snippet and quickly create menu module here. Now we will also create a menu routing module. If you remember, we're doing exactly same what we did for the app module. So here menu dash routing dot module. So we will create a module, we will create a route. The route here will apply only for the menu module. We will shortly see how this will work. Okay, so back to our routing module. So we will going to copy paste a piece of code and I will explain you the route. So here, if you see, we have applied all those new routing there, and then we are going to import the same routing into our menu module. Here if you look, there are routes called a default route called an cosine component, and then the second one is the cosine ID. So here what we are going to do is the component that we used, right, the two components for the cosine, we are going to export those components from this module itself. So we are using the food items and the cosine component from here. So this module will export the components as well as export the router module, as well as it imports the route applied for the cosine module. Back to our menu module, here we will, so here what we will do is under the declaration, the exported components, right, which is under the routed components, we are going to put it here. So literally meaning we are segregating the code for our simplicity. And in the import, we will import the common module and the menu routing module. Now we have all the menu routing and the menu routing module ready. Now what we have to do is, now we should go back to our main app routing module, and here under the app routing module, apart from all these routes, we need to define a route for cosine. So now what will happen, anything after the website name starts with cosine, we are saying use the menu module, and under the menu module, whatever is there for the children's, put it into the children's. That's what the load children's does. So now let's take a look. We don't need all these components which is sitting under the main module. This we have all separated and put it into the menu module. So we removed all those things. Now see, all the routes works. What is missing now? So we applied all the routes for the menu. It's time to put the menu link under the header. So here I'll put a link for the menu. It is building. We started saying menu. Now what happens, as soon as you click on the menu, the URL changes to the website name /cosine, which will put the new menu module into place, and under that the default path, which is nothing but the cosine component. So in our router outlet, the menu module will kick in and the cosine component will start showing up. Great, all works good. This is as simple as that for using the routing. Great, all looks good. Now what we need to do is, when you click on details view, we need to put this to a different route called cosine / food item / a particular cosine ID, right? And then we will display more details of a particular food that was selected. So in order to do that, let's create a component called food details, meaning a particular food in detail we are going to see. So I'm going to quickly create that food details component under the menu folder, because they belong to menu. Okay, it is getting generated. The component was added correctly to the menu module. You can go and see to the menu module, the new component got added here, but we don't need this, right? We will cut this and go back to our menu routing module and apply here. We'll bring in the namespace. Great, so the separation of code we have achieved. Okay, so we will apply a new route called food / food ID. Anything after a colon belongs a parameter. That is where you can use and retrieve the data from your URL. From the activated route, you can use and get the data which is sitting under the food ID property. The food ID is nothing but an ID which is present in your URL. We will be able to retrieve that using the activated route, which we will shortly see. Okay, so we're missing something. We'll go back to our food details component and place some piece of code, and then I'll explain you what it is doing. Basically, this component is having a similar code of what you have seen in the previous components, like the previous component that we developed, the food items and the cosine component. It is going to invoke two APIs called categories APIs and food details API in order to get the category name and also a particular food detail. And we will also call another API called food images, and that will bring us all the images of a particular food. Now I've copy pasted the HTML code also. I've commented a piece of code. I'll explain you why I've commented this. Now let's see how it works. I'm going to click on view details. There is nothing happening here. That's because view detail is a dummy button. We haven't done the work for the view detail. Now let's go back to the missing piece where the food item detail is there. In the food item component, we will inject a router in our constructor, and what we are going to do is, when someone clicks on that button, we will pass that particular ID of that food which was selected and put it into a different route. So here, back on the HTML code, Here I'm going to call a method under the button click. So for a click event, which is the event binding, I will call this method and pass the item.id, which is nothing but that food ID, and that will take us to a different page. See, you saw the URL now, cosine slash food slash 2. 2 is nothing but the food ID. So if you click on any other food, that particular ID came. This time it is 10. So we can see the description of the food and the price and couple of things, right? Great. So these are all coming from the different APIs from the same API branch that we used. So what we are going to do is we are going to apply a package called ngX Bootstrap, a particular version, to support our carousel. So carousel is like you have more images and you wanted to nicely show those images one after the other, like a sliding effort. So I'm using an external package. So this is how you use an external package. So this time I've said ngX Bootstrap followed by a version. So if you say npm install and then followed by a package name, it is going to install that package. So there was one thing missing. I installed the package, but I did not say to save it. So you basically have to say dash dash save. If you say dash dash save, this will go and save in the package.json file. Here you can see, right? So that next time when you build in any folder, it will download automatically. All the packages in the dependency will get downloaded automatically. So now everything is done. All the packages has been installed. Now let's go and uncomment the piece of HTML code that we already had. So let's uncomment a piece of code which uses that package. So as soon as I uncomment it, it's going to build, it's going to apply that. Great, we have an error. So this is an external package and we used all the packages details, but we haven't imported this package in our main app module. That is why you are seeing this error. So what you need to do is go back to your menu module where this component is using and bring up the carousel module from that package. We are importing that module under this module, which means anything that you use this carousel within this module, it will pull up the data. If you put this directly on the app module, it will pull up for all the components. Let's uncomment this. Let it build. It is going to refresh the page. Okay, I'm going to click on any of the food items and it will take me to the next page. All right, see how nicely it is showing. So basically there are 4 images coming for this particular food ID. Let's open up the API and see how the structure looks like. So we are under the cosine food and a food item, a food ID called 1. So we are using this API, and then to pull up all the food images for a particular food ID, we use this API. So these 2 APIs are being triggered from that particular call. So if you come and put the food ID called 1, it is going to pull up all the information of a particular food ID called 1. So in this case, it was samosa. So you see this base 64 images coming, the image name, the mine type, all those things are coming. You can also see this in the developer tool. Click on F12, which opens up your developer tool, and go to the network tab. Clear everything, go back to the network tab, go back and come back and see. Let's see what happens. So I clicked on it. You can see 2 calls going up. One is to pull up a particular food detail that you see in the description, price and other things, and then you see the description, and then the second one which pulls up all the images for a particular food item. So in this case, we have this image that you're seeing on the screen. See, there are 4 items, 4 images. So we're displaying the 4 images using the ngFor and the carousel component. Let me take a moment and explain you a piece of important code. So in this component, if you see, we have injected the activated routes, and using the activated routes, you can. So by using the activated route in the ng on init, if you see, you can literally retrieve the ID that is specified in your route, which is also matching in your URL. You can retrieve that ID. So in our case, the number 1, right, which is after the food/1, that represents an ID called food ID. If you remember, that is there in our routing component, food ID. Whatever you place here, you can use the same name and retrieve the data. If you put ID, you need to put ID over there as well. So this is the only piece of code that is new for you guys. So we use this piece of code to retrieve the data, and then once we have the data, we invoke the get categories. And after the get categories is returning the data, we invoke two calls, which is food details and the food images. The reason why it is chained with one after the other is, in order to show the category of a particular food, we need to first have the category API returning the data. So that's why after the category data, we are calling two more things and then looping the data and showing up images here. Everything else is same. Whatever you have seen in the course, it's all what we are using it again. Go through the code and you will definitely understand. If not, come back and comment what you don't understand. I'm happy to help you guys. So this brings us to the end of this video as well as end of our course, Angular Getting Started. Just to summarize what we learned in the entire courses, we learned the basics of Angular. We know how to define components using the CLI, or also manually how to create components, and we know how HTML works, how template works. We went through a lot of example with the data binding, one-way binding, two-way binding, interpolations, event binding, and then using the ngModel, we used the different tracking mechanism. We also created different components. We saw how to pass the pipes, how to invoke the external APIs using the HTTP servers, and finally we also applied the routing and saw how routing works with different URLs. This has most of the important features that you need to know as a developer as you get started with Angular. However, we still have few more things to learn, which you can learn separately in a different video. The one important thing that you know is the reactive forms. Reactive forms we will use in the next video to how to create all these data. The data is all we have retrieved, right? We need to know how to create the data. So we will use the reactive form to generate the forms and apply the validations nicely and see how we can post the data, update the data, delete the data. All those things you will see in the reactive module. I hope you enjoyed this course, and this will help you to start your journey. Learn and practice more. The more you have hands-on practice, the more you will not forget. The more you encounter error and solve yourself, the more you will never ever forget, and that is how you learn and grow. Thanks for watching. If you like my video, don't forget to subscribe my channel, like it, share it, comment it, and never forget to click on the bell icon.